We are on the brink of our next drug crisis. Their son started taking Adderall to study, but a full-blown addiction led him to die by suicide.
He did not feel a doctor would give him anything that would be bad for him.
For the right brain, these medications are so helpful. And for the wrong brains, we've seen suicide attempts and psychosis.
In my experience, this is the worst drug crisis in the history of America.
A-Train, Addy, Christmas trees, co-pilots, Smarties, and Study Skittles. All street names for Adderall, the ADHD treatment drug. In just 3 years, Adderall prescriptions exploded from 35.5 million to 45 million. But those numbers only scratch the surface because the illicit market is growing every single day. In fact, things have gotten so bad that the DEA recently warned we are on the brink of our next drug crisis. With 5 to 6 million Americans using Adderall without proper diagnosis, and 1 in 4 teens in some schools abusing prescription stimulants, we're watching a new generation spiral into overuse, addiction, and in some cases, death. Ricky and his wife, Kathy, know about this all too well. Their son, Richard, started taking Adderall to study, but descended into a full-blown addiction that led him to die by suicide.
Son Richard had a very normal childhood. No signs of ADD, ADHD when he was sophomore, junior year in college. He had mentioned to me, I got a Adderall from one of my teammates, and I was able to study all night for my exam. When Richard decided that it was time to move home, I found out that he was taking Adderall.
Since he knew it helped him study for exams in college, that he's like, well, let me go to a doctor and get my own prescriptions. After he moved home, I did start noticing some changes.
His mood changed and his physical appearance changed. He would be up for 2-3 days at a time when he would go on these Adderall binges because at this point he had a full-on addiction. With Richard's mood changes and behavior changes, we had to call the police a few times to come to the house. One of those incidents was when he came at me physically and was very threatening.
We agreed to help him find an apartment so he could be on his own like he wanted to.
We went over to Richard's apartment. Light was on, doors locked, no answer. I climbed up, crawled through the kitchen window, and started to look. And I went into his bedroom and opened up his closet door. So that's where I saw him. He had hung himself in his closet. I would not let Kathy go back into that bedroom to see him. I didn't want her to see him like that. It was the most horrific thing I have seen in my life. Adderall addiction was Richard's downfall. It's what brought him to end his life.
I want to thank the two of you for being willing to come here and talk about it. It would be much easier to stay home, go about day to day, and not bring all of this back up. But you're really using this tragedy to impact others' lives, and it means a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When did you first learn that Richard was taking this particular drug? Because you weren't involved in his getting it or taking it to begin with, correct?
We were not involved with that at all. As a matter of fact, when Richard moved back home a year or so after graduating college, we were going to put Richard on our health insurance. And I found out from our agent when he called me and said that our renewal would be astronomically high based on the prescription medicine of Adderall that he was taking. That's when I found out. And I was absolutely shocked at that point.
And he was a sophomore when he first started taking it.
Correct. He had gotten it from a friend of his on the baseball team to use to study for exams. His baseball schedule and academics were really stringent. Time was tight, and he needed to cram for exams. And it's widely known that that is just passed around. And you can
Right.
get it.
And people may not, unless they've got a child in a situation like that, it's not uncommon that that's how they get it to begin with, from someone else that maybe has a prescription. and they're facing finals and studying, trying to stay up, trying to stay focused and get through a week, get through a tough time. And so their intention is to take it short term to get through, right?
That is correct.
And that was the purpose here.
Exactly. Because Richard, he had a full scholarship to college. He was an honor graduate from high school. He graduated with honors from college as well. And it was one of those things that he saw other kids doing. It's like, hey, I had baseball practice all day today. I got this exam tomorrow, and someone gave him an Adderall to stay up all night.
Yeah, and among a lot of kids, they don't see it as a big deal.
They don't, not at all.
Yeah, but you started seeing changes in his personality, his mood, his tolerance levels. It changed who he was.
It changed Richard dramatically. And I noticed that pretty soon after he moved back home. He was becoming more irritable. Things that he would just brush off, no big deal. He became really moody, became verbally abusive to Kathy and to me, physically abusive towards me, physically threatening. It was a major change, and this was not the Richard that we knew for the first 23 years of his life.
This was a major shift in his personality, and I'm underlining that because I want people to know this is a serious drug. This is a dangerous drug.
Yes.
And it can have profound impact. It can result in seizures, hallucinations. It can cause all different alterations in people's behavior, and it can lead to death. And you saw some serious outburst here. And you saw weight loss with him. He would stay up for days at a time. If you went down the side effects checklist, he would have hit just almost every box.
Richard hit every one of those boxes.
Yeah. Now, eventually, he did get a prescription for this.
Correct.
And you didn't like that.
I did not like that. I had a conversation with him back when I found out, and the conversation did not go well because he already knew what my opinion was of Adderall and how dangerous it was and what it could do to him. And his response to me was he did not feel a doctor would give him anything that would be bad for him.
Which is a reasonable thought for a young man relying on a professional. But had he been diagnosed with ADD or ADHD?
He was diagnosed with ADHD from the doctor in Virginia Beach because he supposedly stared out the window and fidgeted, and he said, he's ADHD, here's your prescription.
But you knew this young man. Had he ever shown any of the signs that are commonly associated with ADD or ADHD?
Dr. Phil, Richard never displayed any ADHD tendencies or symptoms from elementary school all the way through college, not one time. And his doctor, when I questioned him about his diagnosis, when we were finally able to sit down and have a discussion with him, told me, I know your son better than you do.
Of course. 7 minutes, I got it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
5-minute med checks once a month.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he dismissed the concerns, citing HIPAA, can't really talk to you about it in detail. I know things you don't know and I can't discuss it with you.
Exactly. That's what he claimed.
Okay. And at that point, Richard was over 18, so there are constraints on what he can talk about, and that's an issue that we need to discuss. But Ricky and Kathy say Richard ended up in a psychiatric hospital. We're going to talk more about that after the break. Having trouble taking your business to the next level? Financial Yield Solutions, Inc., or FYSI for short, provides tailored solutions for businesses generating $1 to $10 million annually. For tax planning, advertising, and retirement strategies to scaling operations, FYSI helps businesses thrive. With $500 billion raised for AI tech under the Trump administration, businesses cannot afford to be left behind. FYSI can even help you explore AI integration to cut costs and boost profits. With over 14 years of experience, FYSI specializes in solving the exact challenges business owners face. Business owners can book a free business review today to transform their operations, boost profits, and secure their financial future. Visit FYSI.com/Dr. Phil or call 800-877-4000. That's FYSI.com/Dr. Phil or call 800-877-4000. A healthy life starts with a healthy night's sleep, and Z-Kleiner was designed specifically to promote restful sleep. Studies show 7% of U.S. adults either choose not to or are unable to sleep in a traditional bed. Z-Kleiner offers a superior alternative. The Z-Kleiner is a revolutionary recliner designed by Flex Steel to be both your ultimate relaxation station and making it an ideal bed alternative. The Z-Kleiner is the perfect sleep solution, meticulously engineered with 4 distinct models. Model 1, Model 2, Petite, Model 2, and Model 2 Plus. No matter your size or specific need, there is a Z-Kleiner that's right for you. Z-Kleiner is more than a chair. It's a complete sleep solution. Whether for daily relaxation or as an alternative to a bed, it delivers unmatched comfort, technology, and support. Visit zkleiner.com today to find the perfect model for you. You deserve the Z-Kleiner.
Richard had called me, and he was saying he was going to hurt himself. So we called the police, so they will take him to Virginia Beach Psychiatric Center. That was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And then they grabbed him and put handcuffs on him and put him in the car. And I've never seen Richard so mad. To see your child sitting there saying all those things and just, So they took him away to the psychiatric center.
We're back with Ricky and Kathy, whose son Richard paid the ultimate price for his Adderall addiction. He died. He took his own life. And I'm telling you this up front because I want you to pay attention to how this layers and how fast you can go down the rabbit hole with what a lot of people think is just kind of a benign drug. And sometimes I've referred to ADHD and ADD as a wastebasket diagnosis. There was a time in America when kids were unruly, overactive, brats, whatever, but then all of a sudden it became in vogue to start diagnosing them with a disorder. And the people doing the diagnosing weren't particularly trained to make the diagnosis. This is a neurological issue. This has to do with brain activity. It's not psychological in nature, and to sit down and talk to somebody for 5 minutes during a visit and notice that they're a little fidgety or have trouble paying attention is not a diagnostic workup for ADD or ADHD. That was y'all's problem, right?
Absolutely.
And this is a cortical stimulant. And if you give it to someone that maybe already has an overactive brain or a normal brain, you can overspeed and get into all kinds of problems. And your point is, you don't think he was ever properly diagnosed.
There was no way he could have been because the time wasn't involved there with the doctor to actually sit down and talk with him to find out what's going on. There was never any discussion of what's your sleep habits, what's your exercise, what's your diet. There was never any discussion of that.
They ever look at his brain?
No, they didn't do any of that.
You straight up warned one of these physicians, if you continue this prescription and you continue at the levels that you're prescribing it, this is going to kill my boy.
I did tell him that. I went to his office on New Year's Eve, and it was after a major episode, an altercation with Richard, and I wanted to talk to this doctor. He said, I can't see you, I can't talk to you. I was so angry that as I turned around to leave, I got halfway out. He had a room full of patients waiting to see him. And I just turned to him and I said, you keep giving my son Adderall, you will kill him. And I left.
Yeah, and how prophetic that was.
We saw him change before our eyes. We were in desperation panic mode here, and this doctor would not help us. I knew there was major issues. To be honest with you, I really thought that I would find him dead from a heart attack because it would have had that effect on his body, not what eventually happened.
And he was abusive with you as well.
That's correct. The reason we had to call the psychiatric center, had the police to take him there, is because at the one point when the doctor gave him his prescription, we actually took it from him and said, okay, we're going to do this correctly. We wanted him to get off of it, and we're just trying to give him the right amount. Well, he actually ended up calling the police to begin with because it was his medication, and the law said it's his. We had to give it to him. So we told him he had to leave, and then that's when he had called me and said he was going to hurt himself, and we were able to get him to the psychiatric center for a week.
He was taking like 140 milligrams?
Sometimes, yes.
And the normal max dosage is 40.
We know that now, yes.
Yeah.
We did not know that at the
Right.
time.
There's a lot of
know
things
that
we
now.
didn't know then that we know now.
When he was detained and taken, I got his pills out of his car to take up to the psychiatric center. And within that period of time, he had taken 140 milligrams in a few hours. There was a few hours that was just running through his body.
And when you found him and he had taken his life, heartbroken, I can't even imagine, but you couldn't have been shocked. You had to know this was a risk. You were telling everybody.
Right.
I honestly thought I would find him dead of a heart attack, not necessarily of a suicide.
Right.
The doctors all put that in their notes. What led to the Virginia Beach Psychiatric Center was an issue where Richard finally came to me and said, Dad, in clear mind, clearest mind I had heard in months, something's not right with me. I need help. And we took him. They sent him to a doctor in a rapid response team who deals with addictions and knew that Richard was there to see him because of an Adderall addiction. And this doctor in his notes had that Richard was suicidal, anxiety, depression, and also put no meds, Adderall, and gave him the prescriptions for Adderall that eventually led to him going to the psychiatric ward.
Were there consequences for these doctors in the final analysis ever?
There was.
There
yes.
was, yeah. The first doctor in the area lost his license, could no longer practice. Richard was considered patient 8, but there were other patients in the filing. And the other doctor just got a slap on the wrist and had to go back for some continuing education.
Well, Ricky and Kathy's story ended in tragedy. Our next guest was lucky. He escaped Adderall's grip, but just barely. Gene says Adderall's euphoria made him feel like a god, but his addiction drove him to the depths of despair.
I was prescribed Ritalin in 7th grade. I didn't like taking it because I felt like it took away my personality, but my mom would sort of insist that I would take it, but eventually she stopped trying to force me. I went away to college and I almost failed out, so my parents said, there's this new drug, Adderall, and we want you to take it so that you can do better in school. And at first did help, but after a while, I just started taking it compulsively, addictively. Then I started mixing it with other drugs like marijuana and alcohol. And eventually it just sort of took over. And I had to drop out of school. I just spent like a year and a half at home in my parents' basement just doing Adderall. At my worst, I was taking like 300 milligrams a night. It was pretty easy to get prescriptions and refills in a month. I mean, I would show up at the doctor's office like shaking, 40 pounds underweight, and he still just kept giving me refills and prescriptions. I took a bunch of Adderall, I got drunk, and I got in a fist fight with my brother, and I dislocated my shoulder, and I woke up in the hospital. And my parents gave me the ultimatum to go to rehab, or they were gonna kick me out, and so I chose rehab. Quitting it was hard. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, but it saved my life. If I didn't go to rehab, I'd probably be dead.
Well, Gene, thank you so much for being here and being willing to talk about this. I also want to introduce my really good and dear friend, Dr. Daniel Amen. Dr. Amen is a double board certified psychiatrist, clinical neuroscientist, brain imaging specialist, and author of Change Your Brain Every Day. Thank you both for being here. Now, Gene, this started out great, right?
Yeah, I mean, I started taking it, Adderall specifically, in college after really struggling my first semester. And initially it did really help. I started getting better grades, but over time it started to just creep in and really take over.
Yeah. And when you say take over, how did it?
I noticed I had a real tough time getting up out of bed without taking it. And I started taking it throughout the day rather than just when I needed to study or do homework.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Amon, I alluded to how this works in a general sense, but it can have a positive effect even for people that don't need it for a short period of time in the beginning, right?
Yes, for people who don't really need it, it will give them energy, it will help them focus, but it won't last. And it can really unbalance their brain.
Right. And there's a diagnostic procedure for this, right? You don't just chat somebody up for a few minutes and know whether this is the appropriate drug for them if they need one at all.
So 85% of psychiatric drugs are prescribed by non-psychiatric physicians in 7-minute office visits that do standard of care 12% of the time. What's happening in America is not smart, because for the right brains, these medications like Adderall and Ritalin are so helpful. And for the wrong brains, we've seen suicide attempts and psychosis, aggression, families torn apart. And the heartbreaking part about your son is what I like to do is like, well, let's get the parents in. Because if you really want to diagnose ADD, it doesn't show up just in college, or it doesn't show up when you're 40. You can see evidence of it all along. And so a developmental history, mom and dad, is absolutely essential to make proper diagnoses.
Let's be honest, we're not getting any younger, and if you want to look and feel your best, check out Pure Health Research. With 45 premium health supplements targeting every health goal, boosting energy, trimming belly fat, supporting blood sugar, increasing testosterone, or reducing leg swelling, Pure Health has you covered. Each formula features natural, non-GMO ingredients backed by clinical research and manufactured in the USA. Here's the best part. Pure Health Research is offering you an exclusive 35% discount. Just go to purehealthresearch.com and use coupon code PHIL at checkout. With their 365-day money-back guarantee, there's zero risk in trying something new. So why wait? Head over to purehealthresearch.com now. Explore their 45 amazing supplements and save 35% before this deal ends with coupon code PHIL. Don't miss this chance to feel your best. $36 trillion. That is the U.S. debt, and it gets deeper and deeper by the day. Our debt has never been higher, nor have the stakes. The government is looking to slash the federal budget by $2 trillion, and no one knows what that will mean for your job, savings, and future. I've seen a lot in my time, and there's one thing I know for sure. You need to prepare before it's too late. I trust Preserve Gold to help protect my wealth, and I urge you to do the same. They are the only precious metals firm I trust and recommend to my family, friends, and audience, and they have a special offer just for you. Text Dr. Phil to 50505 to get your free precious metals guide from Preserve Gold. With gold prices recently breaking records and analysts predicting this trend to continue throughout 2025, you cannot afford to wait. As a bonus, you can get up to $15,000 with a qualified purchase from Preserve Gold. So don't wait. Text Dr. Phil to 50505 today. If somebody tasked me with driving someone to a psychotic state and said I could only control one thing, it would be sleep. And that's what happened. You went 3 days without sleep on Adderall, right?
Yeah, I drove across the country in 3 days, and I did not sleep at all. And then when I finally got to Long Beach, California, I tried sleeping, and I just remember hearing this buzzing sound like some kind of insect. And my body was like overtired to the point where I couldn't fall asleep. And that was the first time I experienced what I now know as psychosis.
And what was that experience?
It was nightmarish. It was just absolutely horrible because my body wanted to sleep so bad, but my brain was so wound up and I had so much of the drug in my body that I couldn't.
And had you ever had any signs of poor concentration as a child? Had you had impulse control issues as a child?
Well, I was a very boisterous child. I was like the class clown. And I did well in the subjects that I liked, but I did struggle in the ones that I didn't like math, foreign language, science. But, you know, it was in the late 90s, early 2000s, they were just so freely, recklessly throwing this drug around. You know, I was prescribed Ritalin when I was like 8, you know, and that's, looking back now, that's kind of dangerous, if not reckless.
Well, I saw in the tape that you took Ritalin and your mom thought it was really helpful. Yeah. So having a hyperactive child, it's chronic stress for the parents. I mean, we can't diminish the fact that ADHD is left untreated. It causes a lot of stress. So she was probably a little bit more relaxed because you were calmer. But what he said in the tape was really interesting, is you didn't like it because it sort of put a lid on your personality. And you have to ask yourself, why would a stimulant, right? Because methamphetamine is speed. Why would that put a lid on someone's personality? And I hear that very commonly.
And how much have we heard that medications are driven because they make people more convenient for those around them?
What's wrong with being a normal child?
Yeah, exactly.
Is what I keep saying.
So many medications are given because the person becomes less inconvenient for those around them. Mm-hmm. And we're putting them in chemical straitjackets because it makes them easier to manage for other people.
Stimulants like Ritalin or Adderall are the #1 prescribed treatments for kids who have ADHD. It is never #1 in my mind. Now, I'm not opposed to medicine. It's not the first thing I think of. The first thing I think of is what's their diet like. There's a study from Holland that was replicated that showed when you put kids on an elimination diet, they got rid of gluten, dairy, corn, soy, artificial dyes, and sweeteners. 70% did not have ADD after 3 months. Diet is so important.
That was Dr. Amen talking about the fact that ADD and ADHD is not monolithic and it's not treated just one way. Alexis says she now has her ADHD dose regulated, but she has trouble finding it. And when she does, it often doesn't work.
I'm a travel nurse. In the last few shifts I've worked, I have been taking my new Adderall. And I say new, knowing that it's actually not new at all. It's the exact same prescription, the exact same manufacturer, the exact same dose that I've been taking. And the last few shifts, I have noticed my Adderall has not been working. Y'all, they did something to Adderall. It's not the same. Last night, I took 20 milligrams, which normally will have me absolutely crack out of my mind. I felt nothing. Nothing. And it's not the first time. I don't know if Big Pharma is like diluting it the same way a drug dealer would dilute their drugs, but this is not the same medication.
Wow, that's a problem. You say you take 5 milligram by choice, that's what works for you, right? Mm-hmm. But you're prescribed more.
Yes. I think for me, my dosing and which medication I've been taking has changed over the years. Mm-hmm. I was diagnosed initially when I was 10 years old, and I did display a lot of the characteristic signs and symptoms of ADHD throughout my childhood. My parents were kind of at their wits' end, took me to a doctor. Now, as an adult and as a medical professional, I take 5 milligrams to 10 milligrams, depending on if I'm at work or just on my day-to-day living my life. And after the pandemic, I noticed I couldn't find my prescription anymore. I live in the state of California, and for months, I could not find a single pharmacy in my area that could fill a 5 to 10 milligram Ritalin prescription. And so my doctor and I had a long conversation and actually increased my dosage prescription-wise to 20 milligrams because that dose was available. Now, I do not have addiction, and I'm very blessed. That is a horrific disease, and it has obviously had an insane impact on many people just sitting right here with us. But if I did, increasing the amount of medication that I had access to because of a national shortage is so risky. And that's why I made that video. Because once I did get my prescription filled, even then I took it and it didn't work. And I noticed just in that video alone, the comment section was filled with people who had the exact same experience.
Right. And this shortage, I know there are a lot of reasons, supply chain, et cetera, but there's an overprescription problem going on here.
So it's both. There's an overprescription problem, but pharmacies are not keeping up as well. And so the people who need it can't find it, and it's chronic stress. So now we have these online companies where you can ask ChatGPT, give me the symptoms of ADHD, and just tell the doctor that over the phone, and you end up with a Schedule II drug. It's not good what's happening. And a lot of my patients who need it are having trouble month after month getting the dose that's right for them.
Yeah, because for someone that genuinely needs this medication, there's a brain function that changes here, right? And we've got some images that you can talk us through here so people understand. I think sometimes people think this is lack of discipline, poor parenting, whatever. But the fact is that when you look at scans of the brain of Adderall off and on, there are differences here.
Well, this is someone who has ADD on the left. You can see the holes, top front part of her brain. And then on Adderall, her brain is dramatically better. So this is someone who it's likely to work for, not cause psychosis, not cause problems. Now she can focus, she can learn, she can follow through. She's not chronically conflict-seeking, drama-driven, which is very common with ADD. And what I discovered 33 years ago is ADD is not a disorder of a resting brain. You could rest just fine. It's when you try to get them to do something, their brain turns off rather than turning on. And the medicine prevents it from turning off. But like you said, if the brain is too active to start, stimulating it is like pouring gasoline on a fire. It's a really bad idea. But most psychiatrists, as you and I've talked about before, never look at the brain. How silly is that, right? This is a neurological brain disorder, but we're making diagnoses based on these symptom clusters with no biological data. And that's insane.
How did you get off of this?
I went to rehab and I slept for like 3 days. And piece by piece had to teach myself how to live life again without stimulants. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I mean, even just waking up was hard. And it took a couple of months, but I started to function again, felt my personality come back. The real victory was I was able to finish school without the help of stimulants. Mm-hmm. And then...
You know, and you're very close to the age that your son would be now,
Yeah.
which is, you know, the tragic thing of these doctors not only not helping, but obstructing the process and actually getting in the way.
I'd rather have Richard sitting here telling his story than us telling what happened.
Yeah, of course. We're going to take a break. When we come back, I've got a really good friend here, a former DEA agent who was on the forefront of America's opioid crisis. He says today's stimulant epidemic is fast becoming the worst crisis he's ever seen. And you're going to find out where the real danger in that lies when we talk to Derek after the break. Well, joining us now is former DEA agent Derek Maltz. Thanks for being here again. It's always good to talk to you.
Thank you, Dr. Phil. I really appreciate you having me back.
You say that Adderall is following the path that you saw opioids go down and that this is getting bad. What are you seeing?
Right. So in my experience, this is the worst drug crisis in the history of America. And right now we have our adversaries around the world that are taking advantage of the weaknesses and vulnerabilities of our citizens. So you heard from the previous, guests, right? There's shortages out there. So naturally, people that need this drug, Adderall as an example, are going to go out and they're going to find it. So unfortunately, now they're setting up these illegal websites, and people go to the websites and think that they're getting a legitimate drug. And in fact, it's poison. It has methamphetamine, or in many cases, it will have fentanyl. I mean, the Homeland Security investigation that was just recently reported, they had 3 pill mills in New York City producing hundreds of thousands of these fake pills. They're not Adderall, they're not oxycodone, they're poisonous fentanyl, in many cases methamphetamine. So the kids are being deceived to death.
It drives me crazy when they say, we've had this many overdoses. These aren't overdoses, they're poisonings. They're just poisoning people with this. And, I've been working on this stuff together for a number of years, and it wasn't that many years ago that all these pill mills were across the border down in Mexico. Now, you're telling me that these pill mills moved into the United States. How many a day are they cranking out of these mills in New York?
According to the press release, those 3 particular pill mills could have generated 75 to 110 million pills a year. Now, I'll tell you, there was a big case in Connecticut not too long ago, the DEA working with US Postal and others. They seized 1 pill press in a garage in East Haven, Connecticut, recently, that was capable of producing 100,000 pills an hour, okay? Now remember, this guy in that case was buying this stuff in the dark web from overseas. And guess what? It's not just fentanyl anymore. You have protonidazine, you have isonidazine, metonidazine. These are chemical substances coming out of labs in China, and they're selling them on the dark web, and they're mixing this stuff in these pill mills in our country. So let me tell you this. You may have heard of the drug Trank, right? Trank is the animal tranquilizer, and you see these people walking around America like zombies. That's because the Chinese government and the Chinese criminals are pushing this stuff into America, and they're mixing it with these different substances and making these pills. And that's causing necrosis, the rotting of human tissue. So we have a national security threat. This is just not about addiction. This is something that every single American, you've heard me say this, it's not a red or blue issue, it's red, white, and blue. Every American should care.
Yeah, no kidding. Somebody is on this medication, and let's just say they need it legitimately and can't get it, or if they've been overprescribed or they've overmedicated and become addicted to it, they'll do damn near anything to get it. And so they're turning to these, what look like legitimate pharmacy sites, right? They say FDA approved. They look like CVS or Walgreens. Everything looks like it's supposed to look. What percentage of the pills that you get off of a phony pharmaceutical site are counterfeit?
Well, according to the DEA administrator and the experts, there's no such thing as legitimate pills that you're getting off these websites anymore.
So 100% of these are counterfeit.
I would say high 90s, yeah.
What percentage of the counterfeit pills are assumed by testing by the DEA to have lethal ingredients in them?
So last year, the DEA seized about 80 million fake pills and about 13,000 pounds of fentanyl. And according to the DEA, 7 out of 10 of those pills have a potential lethal dose of fentanyl. So that's not good odds, right? So 80 million times 70%, that's a lot of pills that they took off the streets that could save so many lives. Now, The reality is going back to the illegal websites. These are unregulated websites. People are now ordering up pill presses and punches and molds and dyes right from the internet. It's delivered to their house. They're buying powder from Mexico. They're going on the dark web. They're putting it into these machines. There's no quality control. They're just greedy criminals trying to take advantage of our vulnerable population that are addicted. My hat goes off to the previous guests that actually are here telling the story. And I'm very sad to hear from the family that lost their son. But that's happening all over. I deal with hundreds and hundreds of families around this country, and they just can't understand why this government, this country is allowing this to continue. The Mexican cartels and our adversaries are killing more Americans than any terrorist organization in the history of this country. But our government, we're not educating kids in our schools about this. This is unheard of. We've never seen this, Dr. Phil.
Yeah, and the question is, why not? I want to put up a graphic of emoji drug codes that kids use. This is kind of their shorthand, right? And this is what you'll see when they go on and look.
I mean, you could see it's all coded because it's just the criminals taking advantage. And to be honest, a lot of the parents, they're not up to speed. And that's why the DEA, one pill can kill, puts out this information so parents can learn. But the reality is the criminals are just taking total advantage of the weaknesses of these people. So it's very sad. And you know what really is scary is the fact that the globalization of the internet, the encrypted communications, it's putting law enforcement, behind the criminals because we can't keep up with them like we used to. The laws are archaic. Our Congress is not keeping up with the advanced techniques used by the criminals. So it becomes very difficult.
And that's the problem. It's not just that they're wandering into it. They're actually being targeted by this. They're finding them, they click on something and they go, okay, we got one, and it starts feeding them more and more of this information. And if that doesn't upset you, it absolutely should. We did reach out to Teva Pharmaceuticals, the biggest distributor of both generic and branded forms of Adderall, for a statement. And at the time of this taping, we have not heard back. But I'll kind of make a statement for them. They probably don't want me to make a statement for them, but I will say this: properly utilized, thank God this drug exists, because if you do proper diagnosis and you apply it in the right way and you use the drug, it can do great things. It's not the use of the drug, it's the abuse of the drug, it's the misapplication of the drug. So I don't have a problem with the people that develop this drug or market the drug. My problem is what's done with it. Just my opinion. I'm not speaking for them, not being their spokesman. If they don't want me to be, I get it. I do want to thank all of my guests, including Dr. Amen. Thanks as always to my good friend Derek Malt, and thanks to you at home for finding us here on Dr. Phil's Merit TV. Tell everybody you know, because we do talk about things that matter to people who care. We'll have even more information about tonight's broadcast on our website, so make sure to log on to drphil.com. You can also pick up my new book, We've Got Issues: How You Can Stand Strong for America's Soul and Sanity, everywhere books are sold. We talk about just this kind of thing in there in real depth. So I appreciate you finding us. Spread the word. We'll see you next time. Thanks.